A counter, a man, a coffee, $4, already paid for in his head before he touched the door. That's the whole want, and you should notice how small it is. He didn't come here to be evaluated, and neither did you, and neither did any of us. He came here because he was tired, and there was a door, and behind the door was coffee. He orders, and the barista nods. And then it happens. The thing you already know is coming, because it happens to you too. The tablet on the counter, a glass monument on a swivel, turns to face him. 3 buttons, 20%, 25, 30, and behind him, a line. 5 people, a jury of 5, and every one of them can see the screen. Let's be honest about what's happening here, because we all pretend not to see it. He hasn't received a service yet. Someone turned around and started a machine, and that's the entire transaction so far. Already the monument wants a verdict, and the verdict is about him. 3 doors, and behind every door sits your character, waiting to be read aloud. Below them in smaller type, a 4th button, no tip, which might as well say guilty in small print. Nobody asked for this hearing. We asked for coffee, and the hearing came free with the cup. So where did this come from? This custom that runs our mornings and audits our thumbs? Somebody built it, and we can tell you right now it wasn't the barista. Roll it back 400 years to a manor house in Tudor England. A guest stays at a great house, and on the way out he presses coins into the palms of his host's servants. Vails, they were calling them by the 17th century. Money flowing downhill with a bow attached. Aristocrats did it because aristocrats could, and that was the whole logic. Then, after the Civil War, wealthy Americans came home from Europe carrying a souvenir. They'd watched Lords tip, and they wanted to feel like lords. That's the origin story, and you should hold on to it the next time the screen swivels. Not generosity, cosplay. Now here's the part we've forgotten, the part that should be enormous news to the man at the counter. America hated tipping, hated it enough to organize. In 1904, the Anti-Tipping Society of America signed up roughly 100,000 members, which is a real membership for a club whose whole platform was stop handing out coins. Between 1909 and 1915, 7 states, Washington, Mississippi, Arkansas, Iowa, South Carolina, Tennessee among them, banned tipping outright. Actually illegal on the books. You could break the law with a nickel. The newspapers called tipping a cancer in the breast of democracy. They called it flunkyism. They called it offensively un-American, which is a remarkable insult to aim at loose change. And in 1915, a man named William Scott published an entire manifesto, The Itching Palm, arguing that every single tip was a blow at our experiment in democracy. 1 coin, 1 blow. He counted them like that, the way you'd count crimes. But the bans didn't work, and we should be honest about why. You can't post a police officer at every table, and no jury alive was going to convict a man for handing a porter a dime. One by one, the states gave up, and by 1926, every anti-tipping law in America had been repealed. Then, the punchline landed, and it landed on us. The country that banned tipping became the world capital of it, while Europe, which invented the whole ritual, quietly folded service into wages and moved on with its life. They started it. We banned it. They quit. We married it. That's the trade we made, and we've been paying the ceremony costs ever since. But between the ban and the marriage, something else had been happening. And here the story stops being funny. So it gets told straight. In the years after the Civil War, American employers found a use for tipping that Europe never intended. Restaurants, hotels, and the Pullman Company hired black workers, many of them formerly enslaved, and paid them little or nothing, on the reasoning that customers' tips would cover the wage. The Pullman porter, the man who made up the berths and carried the bags on the sleeping cars, lived substantially on tips. The tip wasn't a bonus on top of his pay. For long stretches, It stood in for his pay. So while white writers debated whether tipping was dignified, a whole class of workers was already living inside the answer, unasked. The tip had become a way to have labor without a payroll. And that deal didn't stay a custom. It became law, and the law is still on the books, and it brings us back to your receipt. The federal minimum wage for tipped workers in this country is $2.13 an hour. Not a typo. That number was set in 1991, and a 1996 amendment to the Fair Labor Standards Act, lobbied for hard by the National Restaurant Association, froze it there, and it hasn't moved since. 30-plus years of inflation later, its real value has roughly halved. When you tip your server, you aren't adding a bonus to their income. You're delivering most of it. So when the tablet swivels toward you, understand what's actually swiveling. A piece of the payroll, detached in 1996, sliding across the counter into your hands. The screen isn't asking whether the service was good. The screen is asking who's covering the wages today. And the answer, for 35 years, has been you. Back to our man, who has now been at this counter for 11 seconds and aged a decade. He reaches for the folklore, the way you reach for it, because surely there's a rule here, something we all agreed to. TIP stands for to ensure promptness. Someone told him that once with total confidence, and someone has told you the same thing. It's false. There's no acronym, no ancient contract, no clause anyone signed. The habit is so odd, we invented a fake origin to make it sound like a plan. And that's the real problem, if you stop and look at it. We're standing before a jury, being graded, under a law nobody wrote, that no state could kill, that a made-up acronym pretends to explain. So what was the grade, actually? What were we all being scored on all these years? A researcher at Cornell named Michael Lynn spent a career checking, and here's what he found. The link between how good the service is and how big the tip is turns out to be weak. Not zero. Weak. What actually moves the number is the size of the bill, and your fear of disappointing another human being at close range. And the levers that move the number should embarrass us all. Sunshine moves it. A touch on the shoulder moves it. A server writing her name on the check moves it. And so does a smiley face drawn in pen. We tell ourselves we're grading a performance. Mostly we're paying the weather. That's the machinery under the monument. Not justice, weather and nerves and a felt tip pen. Which means we've been reading the screen wrong. We call it a corruption of tipping, the machine hijacking a warm old custom. Follow the chain, and it's the opposite. Tipping was never a private measure of service. It was always a public performance of judgment, one person deciding in view of another what the other's work was worth. The screen didn't break tipping. The screen is tipping with the manners removed. It's the custom finally being honest with us about what it always was. And that, strangely, is where the mercy is, so we take it back to the counter one last time. The jury of 5 behind him, they're not grading him. They're rehearsing. Every one of them is about to stand where he's standing, and they know it, which is exactly why they're studying the pastry case. That's not judgment. That's stage fright, 5 deep. And the barista isn't judging him either. She turned the screen because the screen is part of the job, the way the apron is part of the job. She didn't design the buttons. What she knows, and what he half knows, is simpler and heavier. Whatever he presses is part of what she takes home. Neither of them chose that. Both of them are embarrassed by it. So he presses a button, it doesn't matter much which, and looks up, past the monument, at an actual person. Because when we strip away the buttons, the sashes, the gloved palm, the frozen 213, and look at what a tip is at the bottom, it's one stranger saying to another, "Things should go well for you." A strange little American prayer that the person handing you your coffee is going to be okay. That prayer should never have been given a wages job. It was never strong enough for that. And pretending otherwise is how a number stays frozen for 35 years. The system deserves the argument, and it should get the argument. But the 2 people at the counter aren't the argument. They're just the ones left holding it. She hands him the coffee. He says thanks and means it. And tomorrow he'll come back, and the monument will swivel, and he'll press a button, and so will you, and so will we all. It was never about the coffee. It was about all of us, standing in a line, trying not to let each other down, which, as unwritten laws go, is one we can live under.